Okay. Okay, we are going live right now.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to have you here. Welcome to our March meeting of the Faculty Council and our spring meeting of the General Faculty. As a logistical issue, these are two separate bodies, and Faculty Council will need to go into closed session at the end of today's meeting to consider honorary degrees. So the way we're going to handle that is we're going to adjourn the meeting of the general faculty prior to going into closed session so that we then can simply adjourn the Faculty Council meeting. So I just wanted people to know that in advance. Then the next thing I would like to talk with you about, as we all know, since last March, there's been an uptick in anti-Asian sentiment, as well as acts of violence toward Asian and Pacific Islander communities in this country. Indeed, because of hateful incidents on this campus, the chancellor put out a statement denouncing such behavior and rhetoric on March 9th. Days later, on March 16th, we saw this violence erupt in the most horrific manifestation to date in the Atlanta shooting, in which 6 Asian women were killed. Whether or not the shooter's stated motive was anti-Asian or not, the impact is that Asian communities in this country are deeply shaken and worried about what comes next. Sadly, anti-Asian sentiment is not new. From the Chinese Exclusion Act signed into law in 1882 to the internment of Japanese Americans that began in February of 1942, this ugly beast retreats only to rear its head again as it is doing now. Personally, on a personal note, in 2008, I made my first of many trips to China and began friendships and scholarly collaborations there that are rich and deep and remain to this day. The idea that my Chinese colleagues would feel unwelcome or unsafe in my country churns my stomach. I think of the students and colleagues on this campus and in this community who have so enriched my life, and I am appalled that they are suffering and afraid. The scourge of anti-Asian sentiment is yet another pain that this pandemic has wrought. Therefore, before I share a few other thoughts with you and turn to our agenda, I hope you will join me in supporting a resolution condemning such rhetoric and violence. And I'd like to give Vin the gavel to preside at this point over the consideration of this resolution.
Thank you, Mimi. So as presiding officer, let me invite you to introduce a resolution pertinent to the points you just made.
I would like to introduce a resolution condemning anti-Asian violence and rhetoric and hatred.
Okay. The resolution that Mimi has introduced should appear on your shared screen. It's resolution 2021-3 on supporting UNC Chapel Hill's Asian American, and Pacific Islander community. As you read the resolution, let me point out that under our standard rules of procedure, we cannot vote at the same meeting on a resolution where that resolution is introduced from the floor. So in order to hold a vote on this resolution, which is a resolution of the general faculty, we first have to take a vote to suspend the rules in order to allow action on this resolution today. So let me invite from any member of the voting general faculty present, let me invite a motion to suspend the rules in order to take action today on resolution 2021-3.
So moved.
So moved.
I will take that that second as the second moved as a second. So let me consider this motion by unanimous consent. Is there any objection to moving forward on a vote on resolution 2021-3? If anyone objects, we would take a vote, and it would require a 2/3 vote to suspend the rules. Hearing no objection, the motion to suspend the rules is affirmed, And so let us proceed to a vote on resolution 2021-3. First, is there any discussion or debate on this resolution?
I have one tiny little thing. This is Eric Muller speaking. It may seem a tiny thing, but I would suggest we remove the hyphen in Asian American. In Asian American scholarly circles and community circles, the hyphen would have disappeared quite some time ago. So it would simply be Asian American rather than Asian American.
I will take that as a friendly amendment. Is that okay with Mimi Chapman, who made the motion?
It's fine. Would the same logic apply to Pacific Islander? There's also a. I guess not. Okay.
Is that change okay with?
I'm sorry, I muted myself. I'm less sure of the politics of the hyphen, so to speak, in Pacific Islander. What I am aware of is the issue in the Asian American context. So I'm not entirely sure, but there may be someone else at the meeting who would be able to help us with that.
From whatever little I know, I don't think there is. This is Deb Ikat from School of Journalism and Media. I think to be consistent, we should remove the hyphen from Pacific Islander because that is how the Pacific Islanders consider themselves.
So actually, I neglected to ask whether there was a second to Mimi Chapman's resolution. We've made a couple of friendly amendments. Mimi has made the resolution. Is before we start the debate or any further discussion, is there a second to resolution 2021-3?
I second.
Okay.
Second.
And so I trust that these friendly changes are okay to the seconders. Is there any other discussion? Okay, hearing no further discussion, let us proceed to a vote. A poll will be launched momentarily, and any member of the voting faculty who is present, not just members of faculty council, but any member of the voting faculty can vote. Let's see. Is the poll ready to be launched?
Yes.
Yes.
Vin, hosts and panelists cannot vote.
Hosts cannot vote, but panelists should be allowed to vote.
It says that hosts and panelists cannot vote.
Yeah, I can't.
Message.
Okay.
I can't.
I can't click. I can't click
vote
on
either.
anything.
Okay, let's
Doesn't work.
this poll and let me proceed in a different fashion. Let me ask if let's see if we can pass this by unanimous consent. Is there any objection to resolution 2021-3 as currently displayed on the screen? Hearing no objection, the resolution passes by unanimous consent. Thank you all. And let me return the gavel to the chair of the faculty, Mimi Chapman.
And we're going to take down the screen share. Thank you all for your support of the resolution and for your friendly amendments. There is another item I want to bring to your attention before moving forward with today's agenda. Earlier this week, I was contacted by the chair of the faculty at Fayetteville State University. And as you may be aware, a new chancellor has been selected at that university. However, the process by which that chancellor was selected has come under deep scrutiny, and the chair is asking all sister schools in the UNC system to support his faculty in their concerns. This is a matter, I just learned about this. I got this message on, I believe it was Wednesday night. So I'm not prepared to ask you to take any action today. It's a matter that requires a little study and thought. So I have asked that we take this up at our next Faculty Executive Committee meeting on March the 29th. And as a committee, we will be reviewing information about how the search was conducted, news articles, that sort of thing. And we'll decide whether we should act immediately in your stead or whether FEC will bring a resolution to you for your support in April. So stay tuned on that front. I wanted just to make you aware of that. And then I did not want to close without acknowledging all of the hopeful moments on our campus right now. Seeing so many of you getting vaccines and knowing that eligibility for others is right around the corner fills me with Thanksgiving. We still have a long way to go and a lot to figure out for the fall, but we're getting there and we're getting there together. Let's keep showing up for each other in ways big and small. And at this point, Chancellor, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Mimi. It's great to be back with everyone. And I just thought we'd take a moment to look back where we've been. It's been 1 year and 9 days since I convened a group of campus leaders here in the South Building, including Chair of the Faculty Lloyd Kramer and Secretary of the Faculty Vince Stepanidis, to begin developing a strategy for our campus in the face of the pandemic. With so many unknowns ahead at that time, I tested the possibility of asking faculty to pivot to a remote-only teaching mode. And I remember that meeting right over here in 103 South, and people looked at me across the table like I'd lost my mind. We were in the middle of spring break, and the clock was ticking. The next day, I announced that we would expand spring break until March 22nd, and that remote instruction would begin March 23rd. We also announced at that time that campus events with more than 50 people would be canceled. And a day later, on March 12th, workplace guidance for employees was sent where we talked about the possibility of teleworking. A day later, on the 13th, I sent a personal email to campus on the challenges that we were facing and painfully urged students to stay home and not come back to campus from spring break. How foreign this all sounded at that time. I think you know the rest of the story. We've been through a lot together, and your commitment to teaching, research, and service has been inspiring. And I know it hasn't been easy, but we're grateful for everything that our faculty has been able to accomplish over these past 12 months and 9 days. So Bob and I sent an email earlier this month about our planning for the fall semester. And we've continued consulting with our public health faculty experts, and they've given us a lot of confidence for the summer and the fall. We anticipate, if things stay the course that we're on now, that we'll have in-person classroom teaching, certainly with some level of safety measures likely still in place, and that we'll be able to return to a more normal campus environment for the fall, and that certainly is our goal. I think we're taking major steps toward that type of operation for the fall, and that's what we must be planning for. That's what the UNC system, our students and their parents are expecting of us, and we're confident that we can, that we'll be able to get there. Bob's going to share more details on this with regard to the roadmap implementation team that he meets with regularly, as well as with the deans and the teams that are helping to prepare to make this all possible. Regarding vaccines, as Mimi has just said, we've been aggressively pushing out our communication, and we're encouraging our community to get the vaccine as soon as they are able. And I'm like Mimi, just pleased to see how many people already have either gotten they're entirely vaccinated or have gotten the first shot. And so we're moving in a really good direction. All of Group 4, which includes our faculty, staff, student employees, and students living in on-campus and in Greek housing and in off-campus congregate housing, will be eligible on April 7th. And there is some conversation about the possibility of this date being moved up a little earlier, and we're waiting to hear more about that probably on Monday. For those who are eligible now, as I've already said, I hope each one of us should try to get vaccinated so that we can stop the spread of the virus. We've also recently shared exciting news about our 2021 commencement, and our speakers will be two of the biggest names of non-UNC COVID thought leaders, Dr. Anthony Fauci and Carolina alumna Kizzmekia Corbett. When Dr. Fauci's office when I first reached out to his office, there was a hesitation because he's been inundated with requests. But we found out about 2 weeks later that he really wanted to do this because of the impact that our faculty have had on this pandemic. And so, from drugs that have saved countless lives to new treatments that have eased the suffering of many, our faculty are fulfilling our mission, and we're grateful. And I was pleased. I know that he's not giving many commencement addresses, but he stepped up and wants to be with us that weekend of May 14th to the 16th. My team and I are finding important ways to strengthen this game-changing research that we've been so proud of over the past year. One of these ways is called READY, and this is READY stands for the Rapidly Emerging Antiviral Drug Discovery Initiative, and READY is an excellent example of convergent science that we're well known for here at Carolina. 3 schools, medicine, public health, and pharmacy on our campus have come together to launch this global public-private partnership aimed at developing novel antiviral drugs before the inevitable next pandemic arrives. And I think this is Carolina has the opportunity and the resources to lead globally in how we prepare for the future. And to cite Senator Richard Burr, who's been helping with this initiative, and we spent significant time with on this initiative, he said that this is a generational opportunity that needs to happen. And like Dr. Fauci, believes that Carolina is the place that can get it done. So the READY team is in conversations with dozens of academic and industry partners from around the world. And I've had the opportunity to speak with several legislators, both state and federal, about this initiative. And so you'll be hearing more about this in the months to come. I've also been talking with members of Congress about the RISE Act, which is providing supplemental research funding for our federal agencies, along with annual funding for our important research. And one of the most important parts of my job, and I really enjoy this, is working with elected officials to show the work that we're doing at Carolina for our state and for the nation, and ensuring them that there's a great return on their investment in our university. In other good news, our school and department rankings continue to be on the rise, and we will have important news about rankings coming out next week. And I'm encouraged, and I know that you're going to be pleased with what you see next week with the rankings of some of these schools and departments. Finally, I just want to take a moment, as Mimi already has, to say that we stand with our, I guess as all of us have just said, with this passing of this resolution, that I stand with our Asian American community members in the face of this horrific violence over the past several weeks. Many Asian Americans in our community feel unsafe and are worried about their family members. And I was proud to have been invited to speak at the vigil Wednesday night held by Carolina's Asian American Center. As Bob, Sibby, and I said in our statement last week, we are committed to supporting the Asian American community and engaging the wider community through the work of our Asian American Center. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Heidi Kim for her leadership of the center. I expressed to Heidi on Wednesday after that vigil that as a father of an Asian American daughter, I am learning from her and others at the center about how to be a more informed and better campus leader, but also about how to be a better parent to my daughter. So Amy and I are very appreciative of what we're learning through the work of the center. So now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob for his remarks, and then we'll be happy to take questions.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Let me just start off by also saying it's been an incredible year. Perhaps the best way to punctuate the year is maybe start off with a few numbers. And I think most of the numbers that we have right now within our environment are quite positive. And so just looking at the numbers within the state, just this past week, the state dropped below 5%, is now down to 3.9% in terms of percent positivity. Orange County slipped below 1% this past week. And UNC campus now has a 2-week percent positivity of around 0.08%. So I just want to thank all of you, all of the members of our university community, our faculty, our staff, but particularly our students. You do not have a positivity rate of 0.08% without considerable adherence to our community standards. And I just want to personally thank everyone for their commitment to being careful, to being safe throughout this entire period. I also wanted to just update everybody on travel waivers. As you know, the president of the system has discouraged out-of-state as well as out-of-country travel. And so all travel requests either come to Chancellor Guskowitz or to me for review and approval. That expectation persists, and I know that as things are beginning to loosen up, as the national picture and to some degree the international picture, although that is a picture that continuously changes, might suggest to others that this is a great time to start thinking about international travel again. We are discouraging international travel, and we are still discouraging domestic travel. One of the main reasons for discouraging international travel is because of the uncertainty with respects to the variants and the load that these variants can place on a country and on a city and on a healthcare system, particularly in countries in which there are very few health reserves. And so we don't want one of our members of our community to be stranded in an international destination and in a place where they would be at high risk. But having said that, we have considered exceptions to travel, and those do come through my office for international travel. And we do give careful consideration to those requests. Obviously, they have to be because the individual faculty or graduate student or whoever might be requesting it has important university business to tend to. So it is important for people to be able to defend and to justify the risk that they might be taking. Also, the country that they might be going to and the infrastructure that they might have, the persistence of COVID in that country, as well as the percent of the variant that is known to exist within that country or the destination that they might be going to. So I just share that with you, just to let you know that this is still a concern for us. But if you do have a high pressing, important need to travel, then you do have a mechanism to have that approved. A few other things that have come up over the last week or so that I thought were worthy of mention. I know that there has been some press around the pause that has taken place with regards to the university's Vida program. As I think many of you know, but perhaps not all of you know, that the Vida program, which is a valuing inclusion to attain excellence, that's what the acronym stands for. This program has been in place since 2000, and it has been one of the most important mechanisms by which this university has diversified its faculty. And like so many things over the last 6 months that have had to be put on pause, the Vida program was put on pause as well. That I know has elicited some expression of concern on the part of our faculty, staff, and student body. And I just want you to know that this was not a permanent pause. This was a temporary pause, just as we were putting a pause on all of our other spending. And so I do want you to know that the Chancellor and I and the Vice Chancellor for Finance are absolutely committed to this program. And as soon as our budget is sort of relaunched here soon, then this program will be taken off pause and will resume probably by sometime this summer. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. Also, there has been some press about the community engagement centers and questions that have come up even within this environment with regards to the university's commitment to the community engagement centers. And just in case many of you are not familiar with what that category of centers includes, this would include the American Indian Center, the Asian American Center, the Carolina Women's Center, the Stone Center, the Latinx Center. And there were some inferences that these centers were reduced in their funding allocation or significantly reduced to the point that they were not functioning properly. I do want you to know that these centers did not experience a draconian reduction in their budgets. And in fact, all of the budgets of these centers have been restored to their original pre-COVID-19 budget allocations. One thing that we are going to be doing within these centers is to go through a strategic planning process for all of them, making sure that the vision, the mission, and the goals and the expectations of these centers are in alignment with the campus needs. And so with that strategic planning process, there will be also the opportunity to recalibrate the budgets of these centers in order to make sure that they are properly funded in order to pursue the mission of those centers. We also anticipate that there will be a re-examination of the expectations of center directors, particularly as it relates to the roles of grant and contract writing as well as development in order to enrich the central investment being made into these centers. Also, during the early days of the COVID-19 period, there was a moratorium being placed on multi-year fixed-term appointments. After a lot of discussion, the Chancellor and I have decided that it is time to lift that moratorium and restore flexibility to the deans within the individual schools to assign terms associated with fixed term appointments based upon either their previous policies or what they believe is in their best judgment. So that sort of summarizes a lot of the things that have been going on. I do want to just reiterate a lot of work is currently taking place with regards to summer and fall planning. We will continue to do that. There remain many questions with regards to the layout of those plans, and many of those questions are still dependent upon a few things that we do not have complete control over. First of all, the vaccination of our community. Right now, it looks very positive, making excellent progress with regards to vaccination. And it is our expectation that, consistent with President Biden's comments recently, that by May 1st, all adults will have the opportunity to be vaccinated. And we're anticipating that all members of our community will have not only the opportunity to be vaccinated, but if they choose, will be able to have been vaccinated by the time the fall semester begins. And so, so a lot of our assumptions with regards to the fall is predicated upon that, and also what might happen with regards to the virus load, and any variants that might emerge within the state of North Carolina and our Carolina community. So we are assuming that we'll be in reasonable shape in the fall. And I think consistent with the message that the Chancellor sent out to the campus, we are anticipating a much more normal fall-like experience for our faculty, staff, and students. We'll continue to evaluate the appropriateness of mandatory testing, and we will continuously be examining the community standards that are currently in place for our faculty, staff, and students. And these adjustments will be based upon guidances from the CDC, from the North Carolina Health and Human Services, from the Orange County Health Department, and also by our experts here on campus, people who we have been working extremely close with throughout this entire pandemic, our medical and public health experts. And so with that, Mimi, I will turn it over to you. Mimi, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Deb, did you have a question?
Yeah, two quick ones. Chancellor Guskowicz and Provost Bluin, we really wanted to thank you for taking the time and the trouble to pre-register all of the 18,000 people who would qualify for the vaccine. And as a result, our vaccination was very easy, and that was a great move. Even our peer universities haven't done that. Having said that, I think our students are also looking forward to getting vaccinated, and your email about that was very useful. I just have two quick questions related or maybe unrelated. One is the fall 2021 plan sounds exciting, but like spring, you had established a date like January 9th when you would try to make a decision whether it's a go or whether we are not going to do it. Would it be helpful if we have a date where we would decide, because it would help all the new students who are coming in and our existing students? And my second question is a quick one. A lot of our students who graduated in fall 2020, last year 2020, feel left out. So is there any way we could include them in the whole graduation process that you have, this commencement? And full disclosure, I have a son who is upset that he did not get his commencement ceremony, as you can very much relate to that.
Sure. And thanks, Deb. And I also have a graduate from 2020 who would like to have a commencement ceremony, and we are going to have one. So there will be a ceremony the weekend of October the 9th and 10th, and those graduates are well aware of it. We're going to have an incredible weekend for them, sort of a combination reunion slash sort of tassel turning event, as we're calling it, in Keenan Stadium for all those that choose to come back for that event. It's going to be we're working on that in coordination with the General Alumni Association. And I think it's going to be a great weekend. They're going to have the opportunity to do many of the things that they would have otherwise done during senior week, the lead up to commencement. So that was your second question. The first question is that we work closely, as both Bob and I have said repeatedly, with our infectious disease and public health faculty. And we meet every Tuesday morning. We have an 8:30 call, and so we are asking them every week. Are we moving in the right direction? And until we hear otherwise, we will plan for classes to start on the 18th of August. With, again, a convocation of some sort, I believe on the 16th, that Sunday evening. And so, but certainly if the variant should show up here in a way that forces us to think about a modification, then absolutely we will be working closely with them. But I don't plan on setting a date right now by which we would pivot in any direction. We're going to take it a week at a time, a month at a time.
But I think, Deb, the operating assumption is that that we are planning on coming back to campus in a more traditional fashion in the fall.
You mentioned the CDC. As you know, the CDC announced like last night, but it was in the media today, that they recommend a 3 feet social distancing instead of 6 feet. So that would also change matters.
Yeah, so that's helpful. What the CDC has done is accept the World Health Organization's guideline of 3 feet. And in talking with our infectious disease people, they believe that the CDC, particularly as we approach herd immunity in this country, is likely to go and reduce that further. So we don't know exactly what that might look like or when that might happen. But you know, we obviously are expecting that the CDC will modify this 3-foot guidance at some point in the future.
Thank you.
We've got a couple other questions. So I want to go to Harry Watson and then to Larry Chavis.
Thank you very much, Mimi, and thank you, Chancellor and Provost Bowen, for sharing these thoughts with us. I have a question that is relevant to the budget cuts that were discussed in our last faculty council meeting in the context of some news we heard in our department yesterday, department meeting, in which it was said that because of these budget cuts, it was contemplated to cut the budget of the library to the point where UNC as a whole would lose its coveted Research 1 university status and be lowered to Research 2 status. I found that extremely distressing, and I find that being happy about the rising standing of certain departments or programs is makes me uncomfortable when the whole university is in this shape. Since then, we learned that some of these cuts may be modified and the overt lowering of standing may be avoided, but it appears that our standing is on the brink somehow. So my question is, what is the university going to do to preserve its academic excellence across the board and its academic ranking in the face of the cuts of the magnitude that you've discussed?
So I'll jump in first and then turn to Bob, but let me just say, Harry, that we will not allow these budget cuts to affect the mission of this great university. We've said that from the beginning. We had to protect our mission and protect our people. And we have talked with Elaine Westbrooks about this on multiple occasions. We have looked closely at some of the cuts that were being proposed at the libraries and have in fact restored a significant part of what Elaine was thinking that the libraries might need to take. We have an incredible library system here at the university that we care deeply about, and we are committed to that. And so we have, this is also though allowing her to do what many of our deans and center directors and institute directors are doing, that is to reevaluate and think about efficiencies and where there are ways to reimagine what a modern day library may look like without affecting the quality. So we're committed to this. And Bob, I don't know if you want to add anything to it.
Yeah, well, Harry, first of all, I want to just thank you for raising this and to giving us the opportunity to clarify this. And I have spoken extensively to Elaine, and I too heard that suggestion that our library might be reduced to from an R1 to an R2 library infrastructure, and that's just not the case. Now, there's no question that libraries across this country are under stress right now. And there are a number of factors, that are contributing to that. We are part of a consortium within the Triangle. We discuss how to optimize and maximize all of the universities' available resources to share between each other. But running a library today, it has become a real challenge, particularly with some of the practices of the national, international publishers. Often characterized as predatory and really creating some major problems for our libraries. But we have been working very closely with Elaine, and I believe that the resources that the library needs to remain a healthy, viable library are in place. Do we need to pay attention to some of these challenges that the library has? I would say absolutely, and we have other issues, across our campus, that we also need to be paying attention to. But I certainly would not characterize it the way you heard it, Harry. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's go to Larry.
I hadn't really, I was going to go quietly into the night with this meeting. I said enough last time. I think I was provoked to say what I'm going to say, so I'll say it. I'm going to try to balance what I say with the fact that I'm a fixed-term professor whose contract is up on June 30th, but I don't get my power from UNC. I get my power from the tribal members of North Carolina that I represent across the state. Many of you will remember last time I made what have been just called by Bob as inferences to the underfunding of our centers on campus. Those were not inferences. Those were just facts about me having to think about how I was going to pay 3 employees and myself on a salary budget of $150,000. We have received more funding, I think $200,000 for the upcoming year. And I appreciate that. There will be no layoffs. I don't know about the long term. I have stepped down as the director of the American Indian Center effective this summer, whenever that needs to be done. I also wanted to read a couple of things that I got a lot of great feedback after my question at the last faculty council meeting. I heard nothing from anyone in South Building, but I did hear from a number of community members, faculty members, students. One faculty member said, I stayed up much of the night thinking about your concise courage and how you spoke for me in those moments and how grateful I am. Your statements were so moving and powerful. I felt seen. We haven't been seen in these places, and this is our space. All of North Carolina is still our space. This was from a student, and I find things from students particularly powerful, so I'm going to read all of it. I saw your faculty meeting video, and I just wanted to say that thank you for all the hard work that you've been doing for our communities. This is a fellow Lumbee student. I think actually maybe Lumbee and Cohary. It's going to be sad to see you leave the AIC, and I hope it doesn't take UNC forever to reappoint a permanent director. It is increasingly exhausting for myself as an Indian student, and I can only imagine all of the uphill battles you have to face, not only within Kenan-Flagler, but the AIC as well. And see the link I just posted in the attendees page if you want to hear about my experiences at Kenan-Flagler and what it's like to be called nominally Indian because I don't wear a costume, I guess. Continuing on, I apologize for sending a message. This was a text I had because students have my cell phone number. Apologize for sending you a message on a Sunday, but I just saw the video and had to say thank you. I truly look up to people like you who fight so hard for all of us and have been successful despite obstacles. It's my biggest motivation to continue going, and hopefully I can be able to do the same when it's time. Thank you again for everything. I will stop there before I lose my job completely, before I can find a new one, though I did have an interview with a recruiter last night, so thank God for that.
Larry, it's hard to know exactly how to respond to you in the moment. I hear that this is a really painful situation and episode, and I think many of us appreciate your work and appreciate the work of the American Indian Center and value its presence on our campus. I am going to turn now to our next agenda item. And that is, we do have some specific conversation to have about the budget and where we stand. We've been trying to do this as regularly as possible. And today, in addition to Kevin and Nate Kneffman talking with us about the budget, Becky Mangini, I think, is also going to be involved in that discussion. And we also have a guest, Mr. John Townsend. And John is the chair of the University of North Carolina Investment Fund. He's the past chair of the UNC Management Company, the Board of Visitors of Kenan-Flagler, the Ackland Art Museum, and the Institute for the Arts and Humanities. So he oversees our endowment. I was exposed to John recently when he did a talk for a small group at the Institute of Arts and Humanities on how the endowment actually works. And since so many questions have come up over this year about how we can spend our endowment, how our endowment differs from that of private universities, those sorts of questions. I thought it would be useful to ask John to join us today, and he agreed to do so, which we greatly appreciate. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to the Chancellor for this conversation.
Thanks. Thanks, Mimi. And so I want to just start off by congratulating Nate Knuffman on his recent appointment as our Vice Chancellor for Finance and Operations. Like many others here on our campus, I've been very impressed by his hard work, expertise, and dedication to our community, and I'm excited to continue working with him in the future. And I'm confident that that Nate has not only helped us to build a sound financial model for our future, but that he can and will execute the plan. And that's something that's going to be really important to us over the next several years. So last November, we presented our budget challenges, and I'm going to sort of talk through a few things and then turn it over to Nate and to Becky. And then I'm real excited to hear John Townsend joining us to talk about the endowment. So John, thank you for being here. But we said then back in November that we'd know more in the first quarter of the year. And Nate, again, will provide an update on the progress that we made over the past 3 or 4 months. But the budget measures that we put in place last March and April have really helped offset what could have really been a dramatic shortfall for our campus. And because of those sacrifices that many of the people here in this room have made, we've avoided taking some of the more dramatic drastic steps that other universities have had to take. You read the news, other universities are facing incredible losses. It's estimated about $120 billion in revenue loss for the total, in total for the higher education sector. And I'm just grateful for the work that's been done by our school and unit leaders and the important progress that we've already made, but we still have some work ahead. As I said in the Well article this morning, if you saw it, our deans, vice chancellors, vice provosts really have leaned in mightily during this process, and I appreciate their commitment to participate and contribute in a strategic way that really is helping to reduce spending while protecting the mission of the university. Just as a reminder, we had our 7.5% operating and 1.5% personnel cuts this year, along with identifying new revenue streams, will allow us to balance our budget possibly by December of 2021, but certainly by June 30th of 2022. And just as every unit has been asked to do this, we've done a critical review within the chancellor's and provost offices. In addition, I've directed an evaluation of senior level administrator positions and have consolidated and reduced our overall administrative costs and salaries significantly. Together, we really have positioned our campus well to deliver on the promise that we've made to our community. And these actions are also allow us to work more closely with the Board of Governors and the General Assembly in being responsible with our funding sources. And finally, this work will enable us to focus more closely on our values and our mission. And many people have said something to this effect, but it bears repeating that budgets are moral documents, and they help define who we are and where we want to go. And so that's why one of the guiding principles that we talked about back in mid-January, as we were asking for the unit leaders to think about how to implement these reductions, that we wanted to be sure that it was aligning, that the priorities in these budget reductions were being thoughtful, and that the priorities were aligning with Carolina Next. And it's really critical that we think about it in this way as our roadmap for the future. So I'm confident that we're going to get to a place where our budget reflects our priorities, that our values and commitments as a university are seen daily. And as I've said before, we'll continue to evaluate, adjust, realign, and consolidate as needed. And that's what our unit leaders really have done. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nate to provide sort of an update of where we've been since November.
Thank you, Chancellor. I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update on Carolina's budget situation. I have a short slide deck I'd like to share with everyone if that could be loaded. Great. My goal today is to briefly describe our fiscal challenge, but spend most of our time on updated information since I last met with you in November. Next slide, please. So as discussed over the past several months, UNC Chapel Hill faces three major financial challenges. First, we have a structural shortfall. It's really a mismatch of our recurring revenue and expenses, and that's evolved over several years. It's estimated to total $100 million in the current fiscal year. Secondly, COVID has impacted numerous revenue streams, primarily located in our income producing units. Major areas impacted include housing, dining, parking, patient care, and athletics. Collectively, these revenue losses could be as much as $200 million this fiscal year. And lastly, we have a significant deferred maintenance need, estimated at $850 million and growing. The state is facing a substantial backlog statewide. Next slide, please. So what progress have we made on addressing our deficits since last November? Well, we've engaged extensively over these past several months. We've met multiple times with unit leadership and finance teams in the months of November and December. We considered a range of options ranging from 0 to 2.5% reductions on certain central personnel funds and 0 to 10% reductions on certain central operating funds. The process really allowed us to avoid the broad, less strategic actions and provided units ownership and time to identify options thoughtfully and strategically. Ultimately, we issued a memo directing reductions of 1.5% to personnel and 7.5% to operating funds in our current year, fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. We feel this best balanced the need to get our budget balanced quickly and in a timely manner, but while avoiding harmful actions to our mission. Units have put forward plans in response, and these plans reflect a very thoughtful and serious approach to meeting the budget targets. We finalized much of that work, and the units have begun to move forward with plans. Next slide, please. So what will these plans accomplish? Collectively, this really reflects our commitment to fiscal responsibility. We are on track to balance our budget by fiscal year 22 and for the foreseeable future. And many have asked, why tackle this now? We believe it's prudent and fiscally responsible. Inaction is really not sustainable. Moreover, our governing bodies are demanding greater fiscal accountability. As you may be aware, the Board of Governors is playing a more active role in campus budget planning. Our proactive actions to address our budget situation and institute a process positions Carolina very well, and it allows us to emerge, I think, stronger in a post-pandemic world. How are units collectively meeting their respective targets? Well, most of the savings are being realized from elimination of vacancies, including significant savings from reduced senior level positions. More specifically, we anticipate fewer associate vice chancellor and vice chancellor positions moving forward, generating more than $2 million of annual savings. Units are also reviewing and consolidating programs. They're utilizing existing space and reconsidering lease expenses. And I mentioned ensuring we're balanced and for the foreseeable future. A big part of that is strengthening our governance. We're planning to more frequently review spending and progress toward goals. Lastly, I think it's worth noting that we're on track to accomplish this while still protecting our mission. We avoided broad across-the-board actions and engaged in a much more deliberate and strategic process. We've been able to prioritize our VTE program and new faculty hires and are generally positioning Carolina for strategic reinvestment. We've also revamped our F&A revenue stream to better support the research mission of the university. Next slide, please. So with respect to the second category of challenges, COVID losses, we have some positive news. Carolina is set to receive another round of federal funding to help address COVID impacts. This is the third installment and is estimated to total $45 million. This comes on top of $43 million in earlier rounds of federal relief funds. Half of the latest round of funds are to be used for direct student aid, while the other half is available for institutional need. We've used earlier funds for testing and PPE, student support, IT and classroom support, and we're also evaluating allocation for revenue losses and auxiliaries. This funding is extremely helpful and part of our overall management plans to cover COVID impacts. One additional component to federal funding is the amount available to the state, estimated to be approximately $9 billion. We're still evaluating the parameters on how that funding can be used, but it does appear to be available for several years. Next slide, please. Lastly, turning to our last category of fiscal challenge, deferred maintenance. There's also some positive news to report here. The state of North Carolina funding is much stronger than originally anticipated. The latest revenue forecast was released recently, and it showed a very significant upward revision. More specifically, state revenues are anticipated to be $4 billion greater than originally planned in the current fiscal year, as the state's economy has performed better than forecast. Next year's forecast was also upgraded. What does this stronger fiscal position for the state mean? Well, one, I think it greatly reduces the probability of a cut this year or next. Number two, it also generates a large amount of one-time funding, which is a very favorable environment for repair and renovation funding. We're cautiously optimistic that significant funding may be available to address very needed repairs. And lastly, and this point relates to both the improved state position and the recent prospect of increased federal funding, one might ask, why do we need to take budget actions now, particularly in light of this improved news at the federal and state level? These developments are certainly positive, but they do not solve our structural budget challenge. The additional funds are one-time, non-recurring, and in the case of the federal relief funds, limited in how they may be used. To solve our structural budget issue, we've had to rebalance permanent spending against recurring revenues to ensure we're balanced and positioned well for the future. Mimi, that concludes my presentation. How would you like to proceed?
Are there other sort of pieces of this that would be helpful to have presented before there are questions, either from Becky or anybody else?
Mimi, it might be nice if Becky could provide a few updates, as she's in regular contact with the system office on some of the HR related actions. So Becky, do you want to provide a few updates?
Sure. I have heard from some of you that there are some questions related to the bill that you've seen circulating, which is asking the General Assembly for authority to do some across the board furlough provisions. It seems probably scarier than it is. That bill is actually a follow-up on the system office's requested legislative priorities. And it's actually a much more comprehensive bill. It was drafted several months ago with hopes that it would get picked up sooner. Unfortunately, the General Assembly hadn't been in session, so it hadn't been able to move forward. But the idea was, as institutions were and are facing the pandemic, we had very few tools, particularly in our auxiliary units, to ensure equity in the way we managed flexible furloughs or temporary base adjustments. The request is really out there to provide institutions the ability to do some across the board furloughs should they need to moving forward. This really just grants us the authority. You all have heard me talk before about tools in the toolbox. This was a tool we didn't have authority for. If this bill passes and moves forward, the system office would have the authority that could be granted to the institutions should we find ourselves in need for this tool. It's not guaranteeing that we would use it. More importantly, among other things in this bill is a request for an early retirement option. And as we talk about budget management, as we thought about the personnel cuts, or as units thought about that, they looked, as Nate said, largely at vacant positions, but several people also anticipated retirements coming up in their units as a mechanism for cost savings moving forward. Several of you or your unit leads have asked about whether early retirement options would be available, and we have not had one on the table. Faculty do have a a phased retirement option, but we don't have a broader option. And the system legislative priorities did put one in this request. So we are awaiting to see whether this bill will pass, and that would be an option available. That would be a voluntary option only. So people would self-select into the program, not something that we as administrators or units would select people into. Beyond that, we continue to work with Nate and his team in helping manage some of these budget provisions. And then many of you have asked about the return plans, and those are ongoing. We'll continue to provide updates as we know more. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Becky, it looks like we have one from Beth Mayer Davis that she's put in the chat. She says, right now, raises for EHRA faculty and non-faculty are disallowed even when funding is fully available via grant funding. She's asking when this restriction will be lifted.
It's a totally fair question. Indeed, we are under a temporary suspension of HR actions. We like to make things as complicated as they can be around here. That is imposed at the system-wide level, though given the recent forecast in the state budget that Nate mentioned and the acknowledgement that the primary places of strain related to the pandemic have been in the auxiliary units, there are early discussions about lifting, if not the entire suspension of HR actions, then portions of it. We anticipate that that'll be taken up in the next month or two at the system level. But until then, unfortunately, we just don't have the ability to approve those actions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions at this point before we move to hearing from John in more detail about the endowment? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Nothing else in the chat. Okay, great. Well, let's go to John.
Great. Thank you, Mimi, and thank you, Kevin. It's a privilege to serve the university, and I've received so much more than I could ever give back. And it's a privilege to be with all of you today. As a farm boy from Lumberton and Robeson County, I feel like I'm in pretty tall cotton in your company. I was asked to do a high-level introduction to the UNC Investment Fund, which is the entity that houses the endowment assets of UNC Chapel Hill. A lot has been written about the endowment, especially over the last 12 months. And I want to provide some transparency as much as I can as to what the endowment is and what it isn't, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about our endowment assets. The total assets of the UNC Investment Fund as of the end of February are $8.3 billion, which places the UNC Investment Fund among the 25 largest college and university endowments in the United States. So that's a privileged position, a fortunate position to be in. Of those $8.3 billion, slightly more than $5 billion are in support of UNC Chapel Hill, and the remainder represent assets that we manage on behalf of other institutions in the UNC system, like North Carolina State or UNC Charlotte or Appalachian State or the School of the Arts and a number of others. The $5 billion plus that supports UNC Chapel Hill is comprised literally of thousands of individual accounts that have been established by donors over many years to fund professorships, scholarships, fellowships, other programs and initiatives. And those are really across the entire university. So a lot of that would be within the College of Arts and Sciences. A lot of that would be within the business school, within the medical complex, the Morehead Cain Foundation, so on and so forth. And many of these entities have hundreds of millions of dollars of investable assets. And then there are others that are quite small. So just to give you a little more color into that, the endowment assets of the university broadly available for UNC Chapel Hill in the ways that I just described are about $2.3 billion. The Educational Foundation, for example, would have about $375 million. The Arts and Sciences Foundation is about $339 million. Morehead Kane Foundation is $250 million. The Medical Foundation is $196 million. UNC Hospitals has, and the healthcare system has well over $1 billion. All of that is included in what I described as being between $5.5 billion of assets that are available to support the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In the aggregate, more than 92% of the total assets, so that $5 to $5.5 billion, more than 92% of those assets are restricted by their terms established at the time the gift was made. So, for example, if you have a Keenan professorship, the endowment that was established whenever that was, that supports that professorship, that can only be used for that purpose. It can't be redirected as much as sometimes we would like to do so for other purposes. Likewise, if someone has founded an athletic scholarship, then that endowment can only be used for that purpose. And that is an agreement between the university and the donor at the time that gift was made. And the investment fund really has no voice in that matter. I think one of the common misperceptions is that the endowment is just a big bucket of money, in this case, $5 billion plus, sloshing around, all of which is unrestricted and available to be spent. And that's just not the case. The funds invested in the investment fund are for the perpetual benefit of the university and are therefore invested with a very long-term view. Our objective is to compound capital, in other words, achieve investment returns at 8% or better over the long term. That's a pretty tall order. It's one that we've been able to accomplish, but it's a pretty tall order. But if we achieve 8% or better over the long term, that enables us to support an annual spending rate of about 5.5%. And it assumes a long-term inflation rate of about 2.5%. So if we can earn 8% plus over time, then we can distribute 5.5% of the endowment assets every year to the university, and at the same time protect the corpus, the principal of those assets, and grow those and preserve the purchasing power of those assets. In recent years, the investment performance of the endowment has been quite strong across many different time periods, all to the benefit of the university. For the first 8 months of this fiscal year through February, so the university, as most of you know, is on a July 1 to June 30 fiscal year. For the first 8 months of this fiscal year, the endowment has appreciated almost 22%. And for calendar year 2020, it was approximately 15%. If you had told me a year ago this time, when we were in the midst of market disruption and volatility, the likes of which I've never seen, if you told me a year ago this time that the endowment would appreciate so positively, I would have been very skeptical and thought it highly unlikely. But by having a portfolio that is highly diversified across many asset classes and is invested for the very long term, so that what happens in a given quarter or a given year makes less difference than what happens to our investment results over long periods of time, then that's exactly what's happened. So we experienced so much volatility a year ago, but with a diversified portfolio across a lot of asset classes, we benefited unexpectedly in a way that we wouldn't have anticipated, and that's a good thing. Over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years, the average return of the endowment is approximately 10%, which puts us in the top decile of all endowments in colleges and universities. And so that's a good thing. One of the perverse facts of investment management is that in most things we do in life, size is your enemy. In investment management, size is your friend. So larger endowments generally dramatically outperform smaller endowments. The reasons for that is you have access to investment opportunities that other smaller endowments wouldn't otherwise have. You can practice diversification in different tactical ways, and so on and so forth. So while we're by no means the largest endowment among colleges and universities, we're large enough that our size is actually quite an asset, and we try to take advantage of that. But at the end of the day, these are perpetually invested funds. We know there will be periods when the performance is not as strong as it has been in recent years. So we try to bank this positive performance that we've achieved recently, knowing that there will be times that we need to rely upon that down the road when performance won't be as strong. The average spending rate of about 5.5% is paid annually to the underlying fund accounts. And this spending rate is consistent across most major educational endowments as being generous to the extent possible, while at the same time being prudent and financially responsible. And that's the balance we're trying to strike at the investment fund. One might reasonably ask, why not increase the spending rate at a time when there's so many challenges? And that is certainly within the discretion of the board. But to go back to my prior comments, that increase wouldn't really provide much in the way of discretionary dollars, because it would still go only to the underlying account for which purpose that professorship or fellowship or scholarship was established. As for the 8% or so of the endowment that is unrestricted, those dollars are still for the exclusive benefit of whatever entity received them. So if there's 8% of $5 billion that's unrestricted in our endowment, that's $400 million, which on the one hand sounds like a lot of money, and it is. On the other hand, part of that may be within the purview of arts and sciences, and a large part of that may be within the purview of the medical complex, and a large part of that may be within the purview of other institutions, endowments, and schools. So it's not 8% that's generally available for discretionary spending, as much as I might wish was otherwise the case. So just to be clear, we want to do as much as possible to support our university, and that's our mission. We understand that. We've had extensive conversations with the administration really over the last 12 months as we've all been on this roller coaster ride to see if there are ways in which we could increase our support. And at this point, there's no magic solution. There's no magic bullet. There's some ideas we're working on. And I am hopeful in the next several months, we can free up some additional dollars. No one would love that more than I. But they're not dollars that would ever be of the magnitude to solve what Nate described as a structural deficit in our budget. We would also love to find ways to support the university's strategic plan and the initiatives embedded in that, and we're working to that end. So we're open-minded. If I could snap my fingers and free up a lot of liquidity, no one would be happier to do that than me. But as I hope you can understand from my remarks, that's harder to do in practice than it may seem like in the big picture. At the risk of digressing from the endowment, and maybe partly to my peril, in my opinion, the very best alternative to the state in support of all education would be a large bond issue, as was done a number of years ago. Our state is a AAA credit, the most highly rated credit in the country. It has substantial borrowing capacity without risking its credit rating, especially in this period of historically low interest rates. And I hope that that I and others who want our educational system to thrive and succeed can continue to do everything we can to push the state to consider that more carefully. But that's a digression. Just to touch on a few other issues that we're discussing at the endowment and that I know that are near and dear to your hearts and minds. Disinvestment, divestment, ESG, and DEI. We're studying all of these issues. We're trying to act thoughtfully on all of these issues. One of the challenges is that UNC doesn't make security selection decisions. Our investment team, which is an extraordinary group of professionals, they don't wake up in the morning saying, we want to buy ABC stock and sell XYZ stock. That's not really how we practice endowment management. Instead, we identify who we think are the very best investment managers in a given area. So if we want to increase our allocation to real estate, then we want to go out and try to understand who are the best investors in real estate and allocate capital to those managers. That would also be true with technology or Asia or venture capital or private equity, and allocate capital to those managers whose job is then to invest in specific securities and assets. And so that's the way we practice endowment management. Divestment on the surface sounds like an easy thing to do, and I know it's an appealing topic, but the fact of the matter is that it doesn't really have a direct effect on the company that you're targeting. So, for example, if we own Exxon and we sell our shares in Exxon, they are being purchased by someone else who wants to own Exxon. So we made the decision to sell, but the only way we can sell is if there's someone that wants to buy, and that's someone who wants to own Exxon, even though we don't, using that example. But in every case, it doesn't do anything to influence the performance of the company. You're not taking dollars away from that company. You're not influencing how that company is managed or behaves. So it sounds good in theory. I understand the appeal, but in reality, how you achieve that is an altogether different matter. And so it's something we talk a lot about. And at the end of the day, how can we be a responsible and active proponent in areas of ESG and also DEI, and how can we make real change? There's already a real movement afoot in most corporate boardrooms in the country, and I think this is very encouraging to make corporate boards more diverse and inclusive. And I think this is real, and there's no turning back on that. And I think that's a reason for optimism on the topic of DEI. I think ESG is a topic that's gaining ever more momentum, and I think there's going to be positive change there. And I think the markets, in their own way, will help us achieve that change. So let me pause there. I've covered a lot of ground, and I may have provoked more questions than provided answers. And I know maybe you wanted maybe to provide time for questions. So why don't I stop there, and thank you again for the opportunity to spend time with you.
Well, thank you again so much for being here. We do have a couple of questions. The first is from Anna Crome Lukens and seconded and thirded by a number of people in the chat. And that asks, are gift agreements ever renegotiated if the original purpose no longer seems relevant or useful?
That's a great question. And I think there is opportunity there. Again, it's not a solution to the very large challenges and problems that university faces, but it is an opportunity. So, for example, just to use our own philanthropy as an example, when I was a graduate student in the business school, I, along with some others, established an endowed lecture series where we bring great speakers to campus that speak to the university every year. I think the initial funding for that endowment was something like $200,000. Today, I think it's worth about $1.8 million. So it would yield $90,000 a year approximately in terms of the spending rate. The need for that speaker series probably doesn't approach $90,000, maybe it's $40,000 or $50,000. So is there $40,000 or $50,000 languishing there that could otherwise be used? And the answer to that is yes. And in my case, I'm alive. I recognize the opportunity, and I would be happy to renegotiate that. And frankly, I think the business school would be completely flexible and open-minded to that as well. So because I'm alive and I'm the original donor or participated in the creation of that, that's something that could be accomplished. In many cases, the donors establish these endowments or professorships or foundations, many generations ago, and the original donors are no longer alive, and that makes it much more difficult to renegotiate. So I do think that there is an opportunity. I think the development effort in the university understands that opportunity, and where possible is amenable and open-minded to doing that. And frankly, I think that many donors, if they understood that alternative, I think many donors would be amenable to amending the agreement.
We have another series of questions in the chat from Elise Crystal. She is asking where we can access the endowment's investment portfolio. And I guess the question is whether we can also access that portfolio. She specifically is interested in how much is invested in fossil fuels and other dirty energy, how much is invested in military contractors. And then her final question is somewhat different. Can you explain where the funds came from that were to be used to pay the sons of the Confederate veterans?
Well, to take the last question first, because it's the easiest for the investment fund to answer. We weren't a participant in those conversations. The investment fund, to my knowledge, wasn't going to be the provider of those funds, but I don't really have any more granular knowledge in order to respond to that question. In terms of the first question, we have the ability to show where the assets are invested in the big picture. So how much are devoted to equities and venture capital and real estate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With respect to specific securities, it's more challenging because that would require us to go through hundreds of investment managers and ask each of them how much is invested in fossil fuel, for example, or other topical assets. I frankly think that, and I don't want to gloss over that very important question. I frankly think that the way investment returns are being achieved today and the way the returns in our endowment are being achieved today is being driven much, much less by assets like fossil fuels and environmentally sensitive assets. That's simply an asset class that is not providing the returns, and therefore they comprise an ever smaller percentage of our endowment. And where many of our returns are being achieved are in really the digitization of the global economy, which is a secular wave that this endowment and many others have been riding for the last few years. And that wave is still way, way offshore, and we're going to ride for many years to come. And so I think in its own way, that's going to accomplish some of the things that we all want to accomplish in terms of the profile of our portfolio and how responsibly it's invested. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We have another one from Don Haggis. Is there a substantive ongoing discussion with the legislature on increasing state revenues or a bond initiative to cover the structural deficit, which evidently represents the actual cost of running the university?
Yeah, I'll leave that to the chancellor and the provost and Nate to answer. Our mission is really to invest in the endowment funds. The point of view that I expressed was really my own personal point of view. And so the UNC investment fund and the management company are not involved in conversations with the legislature or other state entities. But I know that it is something that the administration is mindful of and sensitive to, and it may be that Kevin would care to respond to that.
Sure, I'll give you a breather here, John. We work very closely with the system office in setting the priorities collectively among all 17 system schools that then is pushed forward from the system office to the General Assembly. And there's a large request, and Nate probably can speak more to this in terms of, I don't see them assisting with the structural deficit. We're requesting a lot in R&R funding, so one-time funding to assist with our $850 to $880 million deferred maintenance challenges that we have that Nate mentioned earlier. And I know there have been conversations about the possibility of a bond referendum that would be used to potentially help with many of those needs. Nate, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure, just to build on that, we do have some limitations on being able to borrow for operating funds, but as I mentioned earlier, and as Kevin just indicated, we have been engaged with the legislature, and I know the system office has on priorities for the system. We do expect there to be one-time funding, significant one-time funding available this year, which we believe really best positioned for R&R and capital investment. What's needed to address the structural shortfall is recurring funds, and those are in shorter supply, and there's also more competition for those resources. So I think it's a little bit more difficult, but one-time funding is significant this year, and we're cautiously optimistic for some R&R funding.
And before we go to David, who has his hand up, I just wanted to insert Eric Muller's follow-up to our very first question of you, John, and that is, over the past year, as a consequence of the COVID crisis, has UNC Chapel Hill Development actually opened or initiated conversation with living donors about renegotiating the terms of their gift agreements? I don't know whether that's a question for John or maybe for the Chancellor or for Nate.
Well, it's probably a better question for the Chancellor, but I will say that in my conversations with David Ruth and the development office, it's clear to me they understand there's an opportunity. It requires a lot of detailed negotiation, donor by donor by donor, and there are thousands and thousands of these gifts throughout the university. So I think that's part of the challenge, but I believe, at least from my perspective, the development office does understand that there's something of an opportunity there, and Kevin, you probably have more color on that as well.
Sure. I mean, it can be done. Eric, I know as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, there were a few occasions where we went back to a donor to ask them to consider sort of redirecting part of what their original gift was for. But, and so as John said, there can be negotiation around that. Sometimes these gift agreements were signed by, somebody's deceased. And so now it's going back to the family members who now we're working with. It becomes even more challenging whenever, and there are gifts such as this where there are no living descendants of those that initiated the endowment years ago. And so then it has to be taken to the courts to be considered. So it can happen. It doesn't happen often, but I think that going back, if there are opportunities that people are thinking about considering, it's going back to the dean, the center director that holds that gift to go back to the family.
Okay, David, did you want to ask your question? You have your hand up.
I have a question about how you evaluate not just the diversity and inclusion, equity, all of that, ESG in actual equities, but also in a lot of the managers you work with. Do you have, existing set of criteria that you're evaluating their work? How constantly are you able to go back and evaluate their performance and their investments year by year? That was just one of the things I was wondering about is, what is the existing structure for that evaluation?
I appreciate the question. We try to re-underwrite, just to use that word, every single manager with whom we're invested on a relatively frequent basis. And that's across the board. It's not just investment performance, but our very best managers also tend to have cultures that are consistent with what you would want to see in an organization, and practices and philosophies that are consistent with what you want to see in an organization. So we find that the managers who achieve the best investment returns also tend to have organizations that reflect what you would hope to see in their organization. And so we re-underwrite that beyond the initial investment decision or manager selection periodically. With respect to DEI, what I've been encouraged by the fact, and I just got a letter from a manager last week who said, look, the last 9 months have caused us all to raise the bar, and we thought we were doing well, and we now know we weren't doing well enough. And so we are going to do better, and we're going to be an organization that reflects what you want to see in terms of DEI. So I think that, frequently investment managers get viewed skeptically and cynically, and sometimes that's deserved. But I also think that a lot of these organizations care about who they are and how they do business, and they want to do it in the right way. And increasingly, DEI is becoming a very big part of that.
Thank you. And if I could just a quick add on, Elise had mentioned earlier about kind of like, big oil or kind of dirty energy stocks. And when I was looking at the performance sheets, that was one of the worst performers for the fund in 2020 was natural energy, down 29%. And I'm concerned looking at that because at the same time, we're seeing huge growth in global energy ETFs and like iClean. We're seeing huge growth in something like Plug Power. And I'm just wondering about how quickly the fund is adapting to renewable energy and if it's keeping up with the innovation in these spaces. Yeah,
we are trying to be on the front end of that. And that's manifested itself in several different ways. We have reduced our allocation. So we have an overall asset allocation to various asset classes, and our allocation to natural resources has been consistently reduced over the last several years and was reduced as recently as our meeting in February 20th, I think that meeting was. And so we continue to reduce our exposure to natural resources. And at the same time, as I said previously, we're finding wonderful investment opportunities in things that are ESG driven and at the front end of change. I'm trying to think of some very specific examples, but we're making a number of direct investments in companies that are at the forefront of that, whether it's in EVs, electric vehicles, or other opportunities. But and this is part of the fun of it, frankly, is that markets are giving us these opportunities to adapt and adjust. And if we can do that in a way that we feel good about and at the same time benefits the university, then that's pretty satisfying.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions for John at this time. Any other questions for the Chancellor or for Nate on the budget at this before we move forward with our agenda? I want to move forward because we had to bump Ed Fisher last time, and I don't want to bump him again.
Amy, I just want to take an opportunity to thank John for not only his presentation, but for everything that you do alongside probably 20, 25 other individuals who love Carolina, but you bring a wealth of experience and talent to that board in protecting and growing our endowment. And so I just want to thank you. I know you always have the university's best interests in mind, and we're grateful.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed being a part of this conversation, so appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. We may call on you again. You better be careful if you say that. All right. I do want to introduce, I know many of you know, our colleague Ed Fisher from the School of Public Health, who has been instrumental in creating the Carolina Peer Support Network. This is really quite a resource, and I really have just learned the details of it since I came into this role. And Ed, I think, would like for all of us on campus to know about this, and certainly in the context of the pandemic, as we figure out how we move forward, people are going to have a lot of, I think, challenges sort of figuring out what the new normal is. And so I think the Carolina Peer Support Network could be something very instrumental for many of us. Ed?
Sure. And I just had one question for Mr. Townsend before going forward. What the hell is going on with the bond market? But I'll leave that to another occasion. So I want to talk about the Peer Support Corps, which we're developing we're based in the Department of Health Behavior in the Gillings School. But as we'll discuss, we're trying to work broadly to promote a variety of peer support across campus. President Biden stated it well in his inaugural address. There are myself and Samantha Liu and Patrick Tang and Hannah Barker in our group within the Department of Health Behavior, and Debbie Clark has been tremendously helpful to us as our liaison with the Provost's office. Key to what we've done and really the engine for what we've been able to pursue is what has named itself the Carolina Peer Support Collaborative. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but it's a group of schools, departments from across campus, all of whom share an interest in peer support and are working to promote peer support programs in their settings. Just for fun, I wanted to revisit this ditty and emphasize, as this is not a pipe, the Peer Support Corps and the Peer Support Collaborative is not a single program. It's not just one protocol that we're trying to get everybody to use. Rather, we are trying to encourage many approaches across staff, students, and faculty across campus. and I'd like to share two examples with you. Peer-to-peer is a terrific program that's been developed by undergraduates over the last year, and it's available to individuals through their website. And interestingly, the 11 peer responders who have been trained have their descriptions on the website. So a student coming to the website seeking peer support can find one that they think would be a good match for themselves, and then put in through the website to get linked to that person. The website does the logistics, and they can then meet virtually to share support and to be helpful to each other. In contrast to peer-to-peer, which is very much focused on individuals, the School of Nursing, led by Dean Perigalo-Montano, has really taken an organizational approach. They made the decision that all students, faculty, and staff would be assigned to pods. The operating principle is participation is optional, but belonging is automatic. So everybody has a pod. The program was led in its development by Marianne Barinholt, Linda Bieber, Cheryl Giscome, and Shielda Rogers in the school. And they've addressed sustainability already 6 months into their existence. They've addressed sustainability by organizing the program through already existing and funded wellness programs in the school. One of the things that's really interesting about what's evolved in the school is that it hasn't just remained with pods, so that there's now a parents group, there's an international faculty group, there are affinity groups of people with common interests. And so by the intersection of all those different groups, as well as wellness activities, there are many ways in which individuals can be part of groups and thereby linked to others. So again, the emphasis is not that everybody be, participating in these groups many hours a week, but rather that everybody has a connection. Nobody is isolated. Generally, our model is working with the Peer Support Collaborative. We're providing as many resources as we can to varied peer, mutual, and informal support programs and activities across campus. And again, the overarching objective is that no member of the community is without someone to turn to. And then we also are looking at individual benefits. We're addressing COVID, racism, etc. And as we'll talk a little bit later, trying to promote a culture of mutuality. The strategies I mentioned, there's no single program. We're promoting a wide variety of peer support. We're trying to include peer support for staff, students, and faculty. The ownership of programs is within the schools. Nobody's implementing our program, they're implementing their program. Our role is to help them do it. We're also working to try to work through existing channels so that, for example, there's a longstanding ambassadors program among medical students in the School of Medicine, and they've worked with us to incorporate into that existing program more resources and skills and activities around peer support. We're mindful that peer support and the structures being developed are important for addressing racism, inequity, as well as COVID-19. And again, working with the collaborative across campus. The collaborative has grown from about 13 departments, schools, offices, units on campus back in July to now about 40, with about 74 representatives of those 40 groups. And as I mentioned, the collaborative is really a very dynamic part of what we do. Turning to the needs of faculty, the Mental Health Task Force report from 2019 identified faculty and peer support both as priorities for mental health on campus. There are a variety of faculty needs in this area as individual needs, but also needs emerging out of COVID, emerging out of political and other events, racism in our country, also institutional factors, and the stressors that are sort of intrinsic in academic life and careers. A key component of or perspective for our view of peer support among faculty is number 3 here, and that is that the mental health and well-being of each is influenced by that of all. So it really makes sense for us to be thinking about developing a culture that promotes peer support across staff, students, and faculty at UNC. Here are some benefits that have been observed in the School of Nursing. People valued coming together to connect. They noted that there was real value in being able to meet with each other, not for business, but just to be with one another. They talked about these activities creating a culture of caring within the school. The parent group identified, helped each other with unanticipated stressors of parenting during COVID. The group for international faculty provided support to each other, especially those not able to visit loved ones outside the US. And the Levine Wellness Center in the school, which is an established wellness center within the school, and the Office of Inclusive Excellence have joined together to create some events integrating stress management with consideration of the school's attention to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In response to the events in Atlanta this week and the anti-AAPI racism that we're all concerned about, several have stepped forward. Some new support pods for Asian American grad students are underway. In one school, previous talks with the Asian and Asian American colleagues led to a planned listening and discussion session, and the Asian American folks decided that they wanted to limit that to other Asian and Asian American participants. The excellent Asian American Center on campus, combined with a community organization, the North Carolina Asian Americans Together, had an event Wednesday night with over 280 people. Want to close with 2 thoughts. One is toward a change in organizational culture. The task force in 2019 identified a culture of busier is better, as it termed it. Last week, I heard a graduating senior say that the culture she experienced was you're only worth what you produce. The School of Nursing, as I mentioned, has experienced that the programs really help them create a culture of caring in their school. And if you think about it, peer support intrinsically underscores mutuality. You help me today, I help you tomorrow. So we're hoping that through these activities, we can promote on campus a culture of mutuality to balance with the culture of individual achievement on campus. Finally, strategies for engaging with faculty. We need centralized endorsement and support. The Provost's office has been very helpful in supporting our work. We're hoping to get support from Faculty Council. The Center for Faculty Excellence has been very collaborative with us. And of course, the UNC Peer Support Corps, which we represent, is a central resource for promoting support among faculty. At the level of implementation, we feel it needs to be done within schools, departments, and programs. It doesn't take a PhD in organizational behavior to know that the support of deans, department chairs will be essential to having effective programs within those units. Perhaps it would be useful to have an ad hoc committee of faculty interested in promoting peer support across campus. We would welcome that. And we're also working with wellness programs such as in the school.
Gratified to learn about your work and to think about the many implications in this campus and on this campus and in my own School of Social Work, where my academic home is. So I'm so glad you invited people to reach out to you to learn more and to think about how they might incorporate peer support into their departments and schools and units on campus. So I think this is very important work and will be just critical in the year to come.
Thank you. We appreciate your support, Mimi.
Thanks. Are there any questions or comments for Ed before we move forward? David?
Thank you. Just addition to that, I have spoken to many of grad students who have been, particularly for me, have been teachers, a lot of my core classes, who've been assistants, and they've shared some of the same feelings that you talked about with the 2019 UNC report card, of feeling like they always had to be on top of things, that they always had to be working towards tenureship. And I think that also, showing that there's options either beyond tenureship, or that or providing greater support for many of those grad students could also be a very valuable thing, because I know that that's a significant source of mental health issues for them.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that the culture of mutuality is not to replace individual achievement, but to establish synergy between them.
All right. We need to quickly move to reports by title. I had promised Vin that I would keep us on time, and I don't think I've done it. I've broken my promise, but hopefully we can get back on track very quickly.
Thank you, Mimi. So before us, we have the reports from 5 committees: Faculty Information Technology Advisory Committee, Faculty Research Committee, Faculty Welfare Committee, Status of Women Committee, and the University Committee on Copyright. You've all had the chance to look at these reports online. The chairs of most of those committees are in the room. Are there any questions for any chairs of those committees with respect to their reports? Hearing none, I deem these reports accepted by title. And so now we have only one remaining item on our agenda, and it's a faculty council matter, consideration of candidates for honorary degrees, which faculty council members will take up in closed session. Because this is a joint meeting of the general faculty and faculty council, what we'll do now is we will adjourn the meeting of the general faculty so that nobody has to come back and adjourn afterward. But the faculty council members should stay in the room, and we will go into closed session to consider our final agenda item. So let me just first begin by inviting a motion which any faculty member in the room can make, whether you're on faculty council or not, to adjourn the meeting of the general faculty. I'm sorry, I did not. Was that a motion?
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any objection to adjourning the meeting of the general faculty? Without objection, our meeting of the general faculty is now adjourned. So let us now move into a meeting of a closed session for the faculty council. I would invite a motion from a faculty council member to go into closed session to consider honorary degrees.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any objection to going into closed session to consider honorary degrees? Hearing none, we will move into closed session, and I will announce before we go into closed session that when we come out of closed session, all we will do is go into open session to adjourn. No other business will be transacted by faculty council after the closed session is over. So at this point, let's move into closed session. And let's give an opportunity for non-faculty council members to clear the room.